long time. In fact, in the 1800s, Frederick Taylor actually had built standardized work. And as part of standardized work, even in the world wars, whenever, the men were out fighting, for our country and things like that, the women were actually building ammunition and things and ammunition plants for their husbands to use in the planes and in the in the tanks and things like that. So lean manufacturing has been around for a really long time. Of course, most of you know Henry Ford, who actually also implemented lean manufacturing as he was building his Model A cars, and so he was one of the first ones to really pioneer, I would say, lean manufacturing and standardization and efficiency. And then you transfer down and get into the late 80s and early 90s is when Six Sigma actually was implemented, as well as lean. So the two in a combination really work well together, because lean actually improves upon things that you can touch, taste, feel, see, all of those types of things. But the Six Sigma actually focuses from a metric standpoint on eliminating those defects and errors and inefficiencies that you may see in your day-to-day work. Okay, so as part of Lean Six Sigma roles and responsibilities, there's several different levels of belts. The first belt you see there is really just a general, for a white belt, it's really just a generalistic overview and understanding of what Lean Six Sigma is about, kind of like a few of the tips and tricks that you're going to get today as part of this. It's really going over history and really just getting a basic knowledge of what Lean Six Sigma is all about. Then next after that is the yellow belt, where you actually get more. So the more that you get up in belt, and the more complex the projects get, and the more complex and the more knowledge and experience that you may get. And so next is the yellow belt. And then of course, when you get to the green belt, you can also start leading some of those PI projects yourself, as well as you'll have a coach and mentor to help you as well. Black belts, you're getting more, like I said, more complex. Black belts can lead some major KPI initiatives and things, as well as a master black belt. And a master black belt can actually coach and certify yellow belts, green belts, and white belts on, and teach them Lean Six Sigma tools and techniques, like some of the things that I'm sharing with you today. So one of the first things that you really need to learn about Lean Six Sigma is it all is really involved around a process. So basically, when you think about it, everything is a process. When one process stops, another starts. And so that's really what, when you think about value versus non-value added, which is going to be on the next slide that we'll be talking about, everything consists in a flow. And so as part of that flow, it's really up to us as consumers and customers, even in healthcare and outside of healthcare. I mean, if you think about it from, just even when we go out to a restaurant, when we have to wait to get set down at a table, and things like that, as part of that process, what part of that will we consider to be value versus non-value add? And so when you think about it from that perspective, everything is a process. Getting up in the morning when your alarm goes off, that's a process. Going to the restroom, that's a process. Getting a shower, that's a process. All of these different steps are processes in our day-to-day flow of things. And, the same things happen when you go to work. So, there's parts of your work that's value versus non-value add. And as we get into these PI projects, that's one of the things that you really have to stop and think about. And it really just depends on how detailed you want to get when you're mapping out your processes on what you consider to be value versus non-value add. And so value versus non-value add. So basically from a patient's perspective, let's just say in healthcare. So value added from a patient's perspective would be anything that they would be willing to pay for. And so, maybe if they're getting their food late and they get a cold tray in their room, of course they wouldn't want to pay for a cold tray, right? Or you wouldn't want to pay to have to go back to the doctor a second time if somebody mislabeled your specimen or something like that, and they had to come back and, they called you back in and said, I'm sorry, Miss Jones, but we need to recollect your blood or something like that. So it's basically about doing everything right the first time. But non-value added, of course, we actually have a nomenclature where actually there's several nomenclatures for non-value added, the things that people essentially would not pay for. The unfortunate thing about it with this, though, is a lot of people don't even know the non-value added processes that go on in the background. So like employees would know about those things, but the people that are actually paying for the service may not know about. All of that wait time where you're sitting in the ER for 2 hours to see a physician, you get frustrated, whenever you have to do that. And those are things that, if somebody was to actually talk to you, that's called the voice of customer, which, it wouldn't be something we'd be willing to pay for. And so that's essentially how we collect what we call voice of customer. And that's where we determine from the voice of customer, it's collecting those actual voices from the customer to determine what it is they would be willing to pay for versus what they wouldn't. And that's how we actually implement a lot of patient experience, process improvements. We have the metrics as part of healthcare. They're called HCAP scores. And so as part of these HCAP scores, you are surveying your patients and your customers to determine where it is that we need to improve. And so part of that is actually looking at your value versus your non-value added waste. So lean actually is the process of focusing on eliminating all of those essential waste. So as part of lean and the lean methodology, there are actually 8 waste. So we call them Tim Woods as part of this nomenclature here. So transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, or rework and skills. That is essentially our 8 waste. Those are the things that we would be considered non-value added that people would not be willing to pay for. And so if people knew that there was an avenue and people knew that there was a way that they can communicate those things to us, that's collecting those voices of the customer essentially. These are the things that we would want to eliminate from our everyday practices and processes. So just a few examples of that are here. So transportation, of course, going back and forth to your house whenever you leave something at home, that's considered to be transportation waste. Getting lost in the hospitals. One of the PI projects that I worked on in a previous healthcare entity was, and it was about happenstance, there was a patient that was lost and looking for a physician's office in the hospital. And so next thing you knew, we were creating wayfinding maps for people that were getting lost in the hospital because that's non-value added. Those are the types of things when you listen to that voice of customer, those are different improvements that you could potentially implement. So looking at excess inventory and supplies, in manufacturing, we call that work in process. And what happens with work in process, it causes bottlenecks. And so when there's excess supplies and everything is considered to be a process. So if there's a broken part of a process in one area, that's what tends to cause those bottlenecks. And so sometimes that's what causes excess inventory to build up, is because something is broken. And once there's a broken process or a broken step in one avenue or area, it causes a floodgate of broken processes after that, right? And so that's what this is about, is really learning where those 8 wastes are and how we can potentially not just eliminate one, but look at all the non-value added waste as part of these processes and try to eliminate every one of the wastes that are identified. So the next one, the example would be motion. Of course, having to look for lost records. One of the things, another example of a PI project that we put into place was we had found out as part of an ICD-10 coding project that we put into place, some records were actually getting faxed to the wrong fax number. And so having to search to figure out where, all of this information was going, because that's potential, patient health information, confidential information that was going somewhere where it wasn't supposed to go. And so all of that is a waste, because you're having to determine the root causes of that and how we could potentially eliminate those kind of errors. Of course, waiting is the biggest waste of all. Time is the largest waste that we have as part of our everyday practices and processes. And so some great examples here, even outside of healthcare, waiting for a table at a restaurant. Some people, if they're in a hurry and they're already late because of something else that was broken in their processes for that day, if they're waiting at a red light, they really don't want to wait that long, right? So it just really depends on, like I said, if one thing's broken, the things after that usually tend to be broken as well. Some examples of overproduction. So making more than what the customer wants. And usually that's because of a broken process, because we don't believe in the processes we have in place at the time. Sometimes we have a tendency to make more of something because we feel like that something else is going to fail on the back end. Overprocessing is where you're actually So that goes along with overproduction. So especially if you're in manufacturing, when I was in quality inspection and things, we made, they were making extra parts because they were seeing tiny cracks in some of the metering and nozzles and things that we were creating. And so as we inspected, we were finding these little hairline cracks. So guess what? They were going back to make more because they expected that because one of the kilns was broken and it wasn't reaching the temperature. So you see how what I'm saying when I say generally if one thing's broken, it leads to something else, right? So there's just this downstream negative effect of broken processes. Then, of course, when we get into defects, one of the things that I teach as part of my yellow belt classes is wrong site surgeries. We don't want to think that those things happen, but they happen. And I was unfortunately, brought into a healthcare organization years back where that actually did happen, and they were under an IJ from Joint Commission at the time, and it was a very eye-opening experience, to say the least, of how just some miscommunications, just simple miscommunications and breakdowns in the process could cause wrong site surgery. And then, of course, skills when you talk about wasted human potential. So a lot of people, especially new, fresh people out of school and things like that, everybody's really hungry to make positive changes. And sometimes when you get people that start into organizations and things like that, that really want to make those types of changes, once they really start to get in there and it just kind of gets to be status quo, right? They're not hungry to make those changes anymore. It's just about, what can we do to band-aid and make those quick fixes now. And so a lot of people lose that drive and that, of wanting to be a change maker. And so that is essentially another waste in itself because people just lose that passion. But that's one thing that I'm so passionate about is really trying to educate people on these wastes and things because I want people to remain passionate about making improvements. Okay, so Six Sigma. Six Sigma is that actually it was, implemented in, I believe it was in the 80s, where a couple of people from Motorola had decided to implement something from a metric perspective to really look and see, what our defects and variation rates were. And so it's really, like it says here, a data-driven approach to improving quality. So from a quality perspective, in order for us to really look and see how we're doing, we have metrics, right? Data always tells the story. If you don't have another way to be able to communicate that you have problems, data tells the story about how significant and how complex your problems may be. And so you look at this and so Six Sigma essentially would be close to a perfect process, right? When you reach the level of Six Sigma, that would be only 3.4 defects per million opportunities. So every time that you push out 1 million parts, you should only have 3.4 defects as part of those million parts, right? And so when you think about it from that perspective, it's really eye-opening. That's eye-opening in itself is, from an organizational perspective, a lot of businesses are not there. And there is actually a national average that most organizations are about a 3 or a 4 Sigma. So, it's always good to try to reach that level of perfection. But, so like I said, it's really hard for some companies to get there. This is actually a conversion table because I've got some examples on the next slide, but I just wanted to show y'all, from the perspective of, looking at the Six Sigma is 99.99966. And it even shows here that it doesn't show the 0.4, but 3 defects per million opportunities. And as you get into even at 99, you're looking at about 4.5 Sigma. So here's some examples of what life would be like at that 99.9% Sigma, which is around 4.5%. So 1 hour of unsafe drinking water every month. 2 longer short landings at every American airport each day. 400 letters per hour, which never arrive at their destination. And you can kind of see, this is just it. The one that really gets me on this slide every time is where it says 3,000 newborns accidentally falling. That to me is it's crazy to think about it like that. At 99.9%, there's 3,000 babies. falling from the hands of doctors or nurses each year. That's eye-opening to know that, you know, as you know, worldwide organizations are at 3 and 4 sigma, and you know, this is some of the things that could potentially be happening in healthcare and outside of healthcare, right? So Lean and Six Sigma together, they actually, you know, they're great together because, like I said, you know, Lean is about the things that you can touch and taste and feel and see. Those are the things that, you know, we can remove those waste and remove that those non-value added processes. And then, of course, the Six Sigma, like I talked about, removes that variation, but data tells the story. So using the two in combination really is applicable because it really help us to build a streamlined and more effective and more efficient process. Data tells a story from the numbers perspective because as part of Lean Six Sigma, the methodology, we collect a baseline metric as we're starting the project. So that way we know where we're starting from. And then we also create a goal metric. So that way we're, you know, when we reach that goal, we know that we've actually made a difference. So as part of the leadership discussion that we're going to talk about today, so there was a project that I had coached as part of you know, being a black belt. There was a project that I had coached, and it was really you know, focusing on blood culture contamination. And so as part of this blood culture contamination issue, that when we started talking about it with leadership, it was one of those things that was at an all-time high. The highs being 4.7%. And at the time, and still to this day, I believe the national average is 3%. And so when you think about that, you know, it's extremely high and something we definitely need to start focusing on. So blood cultures essentially are collected from the patient. So, and I'm sure a lot of you have probably had to have blood cultures collected at one point or another, but blood cultures are collected from a patient when you go into the ED, for example, and you know, they're really looking to see if there's any kind of infection that you may have. Just like here we talk about septicemia or sepsis, you know, any kind of health concern, even pneumonia, sometimes they may collect a blood culture. And so when collecting this culture, sometimes if somebody deviates from this best practice standard process, right, normal skin flora could potentially be introduced into that culture, and so it could potentially contaminate that blood, which could essentially cause a false positive. And so, as part of that false positive, I mean, there's several different negative things that could happen from that. Longer length of stay for the patient, like we talked about here, additional expenses for testing, needed antibiotics and treatment, needed medications, and of course, with all of that, there's a cost. So each contaminant is approximately $1,050 in added expenses, and on and on. I mean, the list, just like I said, you know, it's all about broken processes, part of Lean Six Sigma. And the methodology is really focusing on, from a process perspective, what can we potentially do to improve upon the blood culture collection process and eliminate the non-value added activities that are involved with trying to collect that blood culture. And so as part of the pre-plan kickoff, and this really gets into the change management perspective before I even talk about that, one of the things that I will say, and I'll give kudos to the organization that really did this, we communicated about this project long before it even started, just simply because we wanted to get buy-in from the people that were doing the work. And that to me is a great change management, you know, preparedness tool to use. Is really over communication is always better than under communication, especially when there's people that are involved in the day-to-day work, and you want to be able to communicate to them, just to inform them that, look, we're going to focus on this as part of a multi-departmental project, right? We want your input and your buy-in as part of this, because we want people, you know, we want to learn from your perspective where the non-value added issues are as part of this process. And so if you really communicate with people before you actually start, it's all the better, right? Because you're going to get the buy-in and participation from those people that do the work. And then as you start to make the changes as part of those projects, you really have those people on board. And so when they start to see from a data perspective, like I said, data tells the story. When they start to see from a data perspective that the things that you're doing are really that they matter, and they're starting to make positive changes for those processes, then those people are going to be the cheerleaders that are going to go out and tell others how successful Lean Six Sigma is, how positive these changes are, and then they're going to start to become passionate about wanting to do more and start to make other changes. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about what I do, just simply because a lot of times when people see how these methodologies work, they want to see what else they can do with those methodologies. So with the kickoff, like I said, it was a multi-departmental focus. First, we met with the leaders, really talk to them and get the leaders on board. And then the leaders, they're like, yes, absolutely, we're going to support this. And then as the leaders talk to other leaders and they talk to their unit managers and the department leaders and the supervisors and the managers, everybody was on board. And that's one of the things that was really good about this project is we had buy-in from several people, right? And everybody supported it. Everybody knew that it was an issue. So everybody wanted to work together to work on trying to get these contamination rates lowered, right? So you can see here, we did several things as part of that communication. We displayed information on their TV screens and their break rooms and things to be able to communicate about the upcoming project and how they could best help us to and participate and things like that. And then, like I said, the directors and supervisors really spread that awareness, even in town hall meetings and things. The president of the hospital actually communicated this as part of the town hall meeting. Like I said, we had buy-in, and that's one of the things that's really crucial about not just leading Lean Six Sigma projects, but as even project management projects, really getting buy-in from those executive leaders is super important, right? But also getting buy-in from the people that are actually doing the work is even, to me, more so is important, because those are those people that are going to communicate with other people on the floors to let them know how well these projects are going. Okay, so DMAIC. DMAIC is the methodology that Lean Six Sigma uses to actually implement the PI project. So it's like I said, it's a combined structure methodology for where Lean and Six Sigma is actually combined. There's 5 different steps as part of this. So the first one is to define. So that's where you create your project charter, and you're actually gathering your team members and you're defining that problem. And then you're also setting a measurable goal. And so everybody knows what's going on as part of that project. Like I said, the project charter is something that you can use. It's a fluid document, but you can send that document and that charter to just about anybody that has any questions about your project. And it helps to communicate and understand, what the scope is of your project, what you're trying to focus on, and who's going to be positively impacted by that change. So, and then of course, the next phase is the measure phase. And so as part of the measure phase, that's actually where we gather the data. So this is where Six Sigma really comes in. So we gather the baseline metric, and we actually determine how complex and how big the problems are. So that way, when we need to communicate out to others on that charter, we actually have a metric that it really helps to inform people of how big these problems are. So that way, we have team members that want to get involved, they know exactly, where we are currently and what we're looking to get to, right? So the analyze phase is actually where we do our root cause analysis. So a lot of times, like I said, we collect all of the issues from all the people that are doing the work, and even some outside folks. So if there's surveys and things that we can collect from the voice of customer, maybe, like I said, those HCAP scores, HCAP surveys and things like that. So we can gather all of that information and really determine from the voice of the customer, what are the current state issues that we really need to focus on? And a lot of that is part of that analyze phase and that root cause analysis, where we really dig down deep and determine, what are the issues what are the root causes of the issues, and where is it that we need to make immediate improvements, and then what do we need to do to prioritize those other improvements, that we need to potentially make to eliminate all those waste errors and inefficiencies. So that gets to the next step. So as you analyze all of the issues, we certainly want to try our best to put improvements into place to impact all of those issues that we had found. And then, of course, as we get into the control phase, that's where, it's not just about identifying the issues and putting in solutions, but we want to ensure that those solutions are sustaining themselves. So as part of our PI work at, in currently where I work now, but outside of that, data tells a story, like I said. So we want to be able to track the changes that we've made, for 1 year just to ensure sustainability. And so if you start to see from a data perspective that your numbers are moving in a negative way, you can always meet as a team to look and do some more root cause analysis and try to find out what issues and what's going on and the reasons why things are starting to move back in a negative direction. So a lot of the times whenever, excuse me, let me take one drink real quick. A lot of times whenever, you know, things may be moving in a negative direction, it may be because people are just going back to, reverting back to the same processes they used to, because I don't think people are watching, and auditing those processes anymore. And another reason is you may not have people taking ownership of those changes, right? And so all of that really gets into the people side of change. And so ADCAR is, so I was trained by ProSci to be a certified change management practitioner. And so as part of ProSci, they actually use the ADCAR methodology. The ADCAR methodology, the foundation of ADCAR is Lean Six Sigma. And so the people that actually taught us this change management class were all black belts. And so when you think about it from but one of the reasons why they did this is sometimes when you're doing PI projects, you're focusing on improving the process, but not so much of improving on it from a people side of change, right? And so that's what they did with this methodology is they really wanted to focus on what do we need to do to get the buy-in of the people that are doing the work? And then how can we, that's, the awareness part is when I talked about communication, right? So we want to make the people aware of any kind of changes that, any kind of projects that we're going to work on and make sure that people are fully aware of what's going to be happening, right? And then you get into the desire part of it because, like I said, you really want to find those people that are doing the work, some people that are really passionate about, making these changes and things like that. And then you also want to determine, the ones that are, what we call change, they're called change resistors, right? So we really want to determine from that perspective who essentially would be our change resistors, because we want to walk alongside of them, beat them, walk alongside of them and determine what are their reasons for being change resistors versus being proactive change, and really listen to them and determine what happened with them and the reasons why, they feel the way they do and that they're a change resistor now, and what can we do to turn them around and make them into a, pro change. And then of course, when you get into the knowledge aspect of it, it's really about providing that the training and coaching that we need to provide to help those people to become proactive change. And then as we start to make these changes and things as part of these projects, it's really about determining what can we do to ensure that everything that we have, everything that we have changed, that we provide education for that, right? So we want to make sure that, we address, like it says, any kind of skill gaps that people may have. If people, we want people to be upfront and honest, on how they feel about these changes and things, because if people feel like they need more education or people need more training or they don't understand part of a process, we need to ensure that we come alongside their table, understand where they are, and really help them to become pro change. And then of course, from the ability aspect, we really need to understand how they feel, or did they feel like they're, with the tools and techniques and things that we've given them, do they feel like they are able to make some of the changes that we have made, or they do feel like there's other things that we need to do as part of making changes, or, it may even be essentially a pilot. Maybe it's about running a pilot to determine, if everything that we're doing is part of this change, that we're going to be able to make it successfully. And then, of course, with the reinforcing of the change, it's really about sustaining that project where you've already made the improvements. Everything has already worked itself out. You're tracking the post changes from a data perspective. And it's really about that sustainability factor of reinforcing those changes. Because like I said, if people aren't monitoring, if they're not auditing, if they're not trying to track these changes, like we track ours for a year just to ensure that the projects are successful. So as part of that, that's really in reinforcing those changes, because we don't want people to go back and do things the way they used to do them. And so the example of the project that I'm giving you today, of course, is the blood culture contamination reduction project. So this is the project charter that I was talking about. And so you can see how, it really gives you a lot of information about the project and the focus. And, like here, our problem and opportunity statement, of course, says, that, for the year 2017, there was a 4.7% contamination rate. National average for blood culture contamination is 3%. But our goal at the bottom really focused on, a time frame of how long. So we said that we wanted to be able to reduce that from 4.7% to less than 2% within 6 months' time. And so we really, like I said, had a multi-departmental focus. There were several different leaders, several different people focusing. We had, a paramedic that joined our team that really wanted to help. Of course, several members of the ED. But you can see the scope. So the scope essentially is, what essentially we want to focus on, because, as part of project management, y'all know about scope creep. So you certainly don't want to get scope creep as part of these projects and things. So let's get to the next slide. Well, one thing I will say as part of this too, though, is like I said before, a project charter is a living document. So it's certainly one thing that we can share with others. So if people, inquired about your project and maybe have a question about it, all you simply have to do is share your project charter with them, and that really gives them a good idea of what your focus is supposed to be. So as part of define and measure, for this project, it was, like I said, it was a collaborative effort of multidisciplinary team that really focused on trying to eliminate all of the non-value added waste as blood culture collection. And so we met and discussed the project charter, of course, the current state baseline metric, the vision and the goals and things that, where were we trying to go versus where we were, right? And so we mapped out the current state process. And one thing that's really cool about the Lean Six Sigma tools is you can be very, very creative, right? So, this is, of course, back before COVID, and so we could still meet in person. And so we actually just took sticky notes and stuck them up on the wall. And so we asked people that were part of our team to actually write down the process on these sticky notes. And we actually performed, built a process map using sticky notes and a large wall. And, that's one creative way to do things. And then, of course, you can also do things as part of Excel and things like that. But I think that's one thing also about Lean Six Sigma is it's, there's not just one standard way to use the tools, right? You could be very creative with how you use those. But like I said, buy-in from the people that are doing the work is super important as part of Lean Six Sigma. Process mapping, of course, when we mapped out the process from the time that the patient, presented themselves at the ED to the time that the patient discharged, we really wanted to get that process from the perspective of the people that actually did the work. So we had their buy-in from the get-go. And that's one thing about change management is you really want to get the buy-in from the people doing the work. We mapped it out on the wall, but we also went back for those people that were not able to attend. We actually captured all of that information and mapped it out in Visio and sent it to those team members that couldn't essentially attend the in-person meetings. So that way, not only did we capture the voice of the customer from the people that were part of the in-person meetings, we also sent that out to other members so they could provide us feedback as well. So here you can kind of see the 2017 blood culture contamination data. As you can see toward the bottom, it was at 4.7% for the year of 2017. When we started focusing on this as a project, it was in February. So you can see at 5.4% and then March at 5.8%. So pretty significant blood culture rate there. And so one of the things that we found out as part of this when we were mapping out the current state process is we found out, which is something traditional that happens a lot of times with process flows, right? Not everybody does it the same. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to collect as part of mapping out the current state is that with 3 different people that had 3 different jobs, they all collected blood a different way. And so there wasn't really any kind of standard practices that were in place at the time. And so we knew as part of just mapping this out, that was one of the things that we certainly wanted to focus on with standardization. So you can see here from the blood culture collection process, some of the steps may have been similar, but there was also some of the steps where when they completed these processes that were completely different. Okay, so as part of the analyze and improve process flow, So what we did is we took that those current state process flows that you saw on the previous slide, and we started asking all of the actionable questions like who, what, when, where, why, how many, how much, how many people are impacted by the issues as part of this process. And one thing that's really good about Lean Six Sigma too is you have to get consensus from the teams as part of making any kind of changes, because you want to ensure that everybody agrees upon even current state. But also when you start to make improvements, that's one of the things that you want to do is get consensus from the team, and it's not just one-sided. Another thing that we do not allow as part of Lean Six Sigma is finger pointing. It's not a blame game because it's not a people problem. A lot of times when you have broken processes, no matter who you put in the place to do the work as part of that process, it's still going to be broken. And so that's one thing that's good about a Lean Six Sigma and PIs, because you're focusing on those root causes, and we want to put in a long-term sustainable solution to impact those, to where regardless of who actually gets put into that process, once we've completed those improvements, it should be a well-ran process and an efficient process after that. So you can see that we did the same thing as part of the team meetings. We utilized the large wall and used the sticky notes to actually complete a fishbone map and a diagram. We also completed a 5Y, but I didn't include that as part of today's presentation. But one of the things that we really wanted to focus on, of course, was the fact that everybody did the processes differently, right? And so as we get into the improve phase, that was one of the things, like I said, standardization was one of the, we wanted to try to improve upon those broken processes and build essentially what we call the best practice process. And so you can see that the fishbone diagram here, it is very, very complex. I mean, we had so many issues that we found. And I mean, that was one thing that was great about having the team members that we did, because we got the perspective and the issues from, so many different avenues as part of that process. I mean, even to the point of coding and billing, we, from the lab perspective, like it even says one of the issues was using generic labels, a lot of aseptic technique issues, but, patient identification errors. There were so many different levels and different aspects of people, when we gathered this information. It's just, I'll just say that we call this a crazy fish because it had so many bones, right? But, of course, with the bones, there comes opportunities to improve. And so this was our problems and solutions sheet. So taking all of those different issues that we had on our fishbone. And like I said, one of the things that I found as part of being in PI for so many years, sometimes if you don't try to put as many improvements into place as possible, there may be issues that if you didn't try to put a solution into place for it, it may come back and bite you later. And so that's where, I believe that even if it's not necessarily a root cause, you may still want to try to put even small improvements, or what we call just do it improvements, into place, because, we want to try to address as many issues as possible. You just don't want things that are going to come back later on in time and bite you when, it was something clear that you had found as part of your root cause analysis, and you could have put an issue into place and you didn't. So you can see how complex all of the issues were as part of this PI project. We had, not drawing enough blood. So what happens with not drawing enough blood? Sometimes you have to go back and redraw, right? And a lot of patients, if they're a difficult sick from the first time, of course, they're not going to want you to, and even some patients at that point, if they were a difficult stick, of course, they're not going to be, they're not going to like being stuck 3 or 4 different times. And then there's those patients that you can't stick 3 or 4 times because they just don't have enough blood, right? So these are all different things that we saw as part of doing our root cause analysis. And the reason why, with the patients being a difficult stick, it wasn't just about focusing on the contamination reduction aspect of it. It was about how do we ensure that the cultures that we're collecting are good cultures, right? So ensuring that we fill the bottles up to approximately 10 milliliters of blood, ensuring that we make sure we scrub the site for at least, we had this saying, it was called 30 and 30 or else you're dirty. So basically what that meant is you got to scrub the site for at least 30 seconds to ensure that you're killing all of that bacteria. And then, of course, you have to dry it for at least 30 seconds because you want to ensure that your site is dry, or you may end up getting some of that flora contamination, like what we talked about in the beginning of the presentation today. You know, there's certain things that you want to include in your improvement processes that are must do's, right? You want to make sure that you're addressing those root causes, but also, like I said, there may be other things that you want to make improvements on to make it a better experience for your patient or your customer. So here's an actual second page of those improvements. And like I said, you know, as you look at some of this here to the side, you see how some of it has the same solution, right? So there may be different issues, but essentially one of these solutions may address 2 or 3 of those issues. And so that's another thing you want to look at too, is it's not just a one and done. You know, there may be things that you can put into place that may help improve 5 or 6 different steps in the process. So this is an example of the standard work that we had built as part of our future state process. So like I said, you went from your current state process to your future state. And so basically what we had done is, since there wasn't, y'all saw in the current state process map, everybody was doing things differently. So what we wanted to do is drill it down and build something that was very simplistic so people could understand how to collect a blood culture from start to finish. And so that's how we ended up with the standard work process. So you can see here, we even went as far down as ensuring that people were donning their gloves before they clean the Mayo stand, because, you know, if you don't clean the Mayo stand and you set your supplies on the Mayo stand, it could, you know, potentially introduce contamination to your supplies and your blood collection bottles. And then if you don't put your gloves on and things like that, that also could help to introduce contamination as well. So we went through all of these thought processes and things, and also did a lot of studying. The 2 leaders that actually led this process, and I coached them. We all went to a BioMariA conference, which is for those that are in healthcare, it's they make some of the blood culture bottles and some of the supplies that we use as part of this collection process. And so we actually went because they had done a presentation on how to reduce blood culture contamination. And so, you know, we did our homework in trying to determine what we needed to do to build the best standard work process as possible as part of our future state. So as part of that control phase, like I said, you really need to get into really sustaining that process. And so one of the things that we had found as part of our sustainment is there were people, the employees coming in from outside facilities and things that weren't part of the initial training. As we built the future state, we did this massive 3-day training, right? And as part of this massive 3-day training, we tried to train as many people as possible. But one of the things that we were finding as part of this training was essentially that we weren't being able to capture all of the temporary employees that may come and go. And so there was some variation. So what we decided to do was build the standard work video and be able to focus on trying to eliminate all, you know, as much of the issues as possible. And so one of the things that we found too is as part of that training, you know, students, new nurses and things like that were coming out on the floor, only got about 2 minutes of training on blood culture collection before they started out on the floor with their preceptor. And so that was another thing we were finding. So as we started to see the little ticks in the data, because we started to track the contamination rates daily. And that's the other thing. Sometimes when you do some of these projects, if the data doesn't come to you as timely as you would like it to, you may try to start tracking that data yourself, or, you know, have a person to track that data for you, to where you can actually see the daily changes or the weekly changes. If the data doesn't get to you for, you know, let's just say it's a month behind, right? You want to be able to try to see how timely the changes are and how your processes are sustaining themselves. So you may have to create a report yourself and have somebody track, you know, have somebody to track the data to be able to see where the variation is in those processes, and be able to see, you know, how fast can we get these results back to the leaders so that they can address it with those people that are, you know, are collecting these blood cultures, to let them know that the results were contaminated, and really start to recoach and retrain those people as part of these processes. And so you can see here, you know, we started the project back on February the 7th, 2018. And so you can kind of see how high the contamination rates were at that time. And then as we got down, you know, through July 2018, you could see the drop, because like I said, we trained in March, 3 days. So we started the project in February. We built the standard work in April, did the training in May. And so you can see how once we had started training everyone, how the very, the data, from the data perspective, how things started to improve, right? So this right here kind of gives you an idea. So this is a 2018 blood culture contamination rates. Like I said, we started the standard, we started the process in February. We completed the standard work in April. I had our skills training in May, but you can see how once we started implementing those new processes and people started buying to the changes, even down in December, we were less than 1%. So for the average of 2018, so 2017, it was 4.7%, and the year of 2018, it was 2.6% for the year. But you can see how, as you go down through the rest of the year, you can see the data differences there in the data. Like I said, as part of the sustainment, we built a standard work video, and we also built a standard work audit to coincide with the standard work process, just simply because that was one of the things that we were seeing, and that's really part of that reinforcement part of that ADCAR, is building that audit to really reinforce those changes that we had made and the hard work that people had put in to really, sustain these processes. And so, not only did we audit people when they would deviate from the standard, but we also posted those results in a huddle board out in the areas where these people would work. And so when the directors would meet with these people, they would go over these results. And it wasn't to throw people out on Front Street and really to in a negative way. It was a learning experience. So how can we do better? It was a team-based activity to where people, and one thing that we were seeing is that if one person was to audit another person, then they gave them constructive feedback at the time. So it was really about these people taking these processes and owning them and improving upon these. And that's what really helped sustain this process for the long term, is people started owning it. People wanted to do better. Once they started seeing how well they could go, they wanted to get down. Like, at one point we wanted to get below 2%, then we wanted to get below 1%. And y'all see how gradually we got there, right? In fact, there was a few weeks as part of 2019 that we had 0 contaminations, which is awesome. But as part of that, we also wanted to celebrate those changes. So we had ice cream parties, we had pizza parties, and you see we had applause points as part of the organization where I was working. It's one of the things that we awarded. So if people had 0 contaminations within a rolling 6-month period, we awarded them with applause points. So that way they could really, it helped people to get on board with, becoming those positive change people, and really be passionate about PI and be passionate about the work they were doing. And so as you start to see that, it grows because people want to know, what is it that y'all have done to be so successful? And so that's also part of building that PI culture. So of course, here's the example of the standard work. And as you can see, the standard work coincides with this, the standard work audit coincides with the standard work, because for every step that we had in the standard work, we had a step in the standard work audit. So like this right here was what we call the major failure. And so that's the reason why we have the underline in red, because these are potential ways that we could fail ultimately, right? So if you don't cleanse this off for 30 seconds and you don't allow it to dry, those are major failures as part of the blood culture collection process. Another thing too, as part of these major failures, were don't touch the site, because if you touch the site, you could contaminate it even with gloves on. There was times where some nurses and things would tear the tip off of their glove just because they didn't want to contaminate it with the tip of their glove, not realizing that the tip of their finger could also be potentially contaminated. But the other thing that we wanted to do, aside from just looking to see what was, what kind of issues we would find as part of the audit, we also wanted to see, as part of comments and concerns, did you have to stop at any time to get supplies? If yes, what were those items? Because from the very get-go, we tried to standardize a location to where all these supplies were in one place. And so if there was something that you had to consistently go back and forth to get, so what was that? Did you see anything during the process that made you absolutely stop collecting that culture? If yes, what was it? Did the people know where the standard work was? So in lean manufacturing, and this is where I actually am very passionate about standard work, And I had learned about standard work practices as part of being in lean manufacturing in a manufacturing facility. It wasn't even in healthcare. And so one of the things that about standard work is, in lean manufacturing, you post the standard works where the people are actually doing the work. So if they have a doubt about how that process flows, they can pick up a laminated copy of the standard work process and be able to determine this is how I do my job, right? I know now, as part of healthcare for, contamination reasons or in, bacterial concerns and things like that, we can't really post it out there where the work is being done. But what we did is we created notebooks, and we stuck laminated pages as part of these notebooks and stuck those notebooks in the areas. So that way, if a person did deviate from the process and they happened to be if they were going to be audited, they could refer back to that standard work and be able to determine where they deviated from the process. So we asked the two leaders as part of the project that was completed, where they actually got their yellow belt certification. We asked them from that perspective, what are some lessons learned, that we could take away from this? And so you could see from their perspective, it provided those tools and resources to help improving upon the blood culture contamination rates. It was really a multidisciplinary effort in trying to, trying to get to improve upon these processes. But one of the things that I think is most important about what they said here was communication is key, and holding people accountable is another thing. So as part of sustainability, whenever you see deviations from the process, we must hold each other accountable to a higher standard, right? And so that was one of the things that they talked about as part of their lessons learned, was really holding people accountable to ensure that everyone is living up to that best practice that was created. And of course, standard work can be utilized in standard work processes are something that are visual. And that's the thing about PI that is also really, really helpful, is it's a lot of visual things, right? It's things that people, like I said, as part of lean, it's things that people can touch, people can see. There's a lot of visual management tools that are involved with Lean Six Sigma. And so it makes it to where people can actually see the way, see the deviations, see how complex these issues are. But, once you make these changes, you can also physically see the impacts of all your hard work, right? Because you have your metrics there that tell the story of how good the job was that you had done and what you continue to do to sustain your projects. So looking at this in December 2019, so you can see some of the times where the project may have risen back up just a little bit. And one of the things that we found out as part of that rise in contamination was there was a lot of student nurses and things that started on the floors at certain times of the year. And so at those times of the year, we also knew that we couldn't just provide annual training, right? We needed to provide just-in-time training for those new nurses and things as they came in and started on the floors, because that was where we were, because we did track the data so closely, we were able to determine that was because we had some educated nurses that had just started on the floors and really needed to be trained on our future state processes. And so we built a standard work video that coincided with the standard work process and the standard work audit to really educate those new nurses at new employee orientation before they even started at the hospitals. And so this really helped out with lowering those contamination rates from that perspective. Some sustainment challenges that we saw, like I said, were one of the things that we found looking at the data is we had those new student nurses that started on the floors. And then, even through COVID and things, that was one of the things that we found is, because we were so short-staffed during COVID, one of the things that we saw is we had a lot of nurses coming in that worked for the state. And so one of the things that we found with that too is our contamination rates went back up, because a lot of these temporary nurses that were coming in weren't necessarily trained on our best practice process. And so you can kind of see how a lot of times, just if you track the data so significantly that you can see those, you can actually see, at times whenever new people would start on the floor, temporary staff would come in, you can start to see all those deviations or variations in the data. And so, of course, they knew at that point that it was time to recoach and retrain. So we actually created that standard work video that I talked about. So, and it basically just walks through the standard work process. And that was something that we're using to train them at new employee orientation. And so step by step, it follows the standard work. And so, once they actually watch the video, they're quizzed on, certain questions as part of those major failure points as part of the process, like how long do you scrub and how long do you dry? Like I said, they're supposed to scrub for at least 30 seconds, so they're supposed to let it dry for at least 30 seconds. So all of those major failure points, they're quizzed on that after they watch the video. And so it's something to help also reduce the contamination rates. Action plans, of course, for 2020 and on into 2021 was just continue sustainment of the ED and ensuring that everyone is training everyone to follow that best practice process. Like I said, we built that standard work collection video, so just trying to train all of those new employees before they start on the floor, tracking those contaminations with a fine-tooth comb and really ensuring that you have good data, because that was one of the other things that we found as part of this is, sometimes people were coming in, but we weren't, if they didn't have, like if they worked in an external facility, we may not have all of their employee information because they come from a temp agency or something like that. So sometimes it was really hard to track a lot of those people that came and, would come in and go right back out. But, you could see those differences in the data. So we'd go back and we'd go, well, why is that, is the contamination rates? Well, it's because we had 13 temp nurses to stay that were really helping us because we were short staffed or something like that. But it's really important to try to keep a hold of that. And then, of course, being able to have that executive level support to be able to, push some of the other issues. So as part of blood culture contamination, one of the things that we were finding is, you're not supposed to collect the blood via an IV start because that could also potentially, produce, help to contaminate the culture as well. So ensuring that people didn't do that as part of the processes too. And that's about all I have. So thank you so much for listening today. I hope that I've really given you a great project example of how to utilize Lean Six Sigma tools and techniques to improve healthcare outcomes. I left my cell phone information and of course my email. So if you are interested in learning more, or if you have any questions, we can address that at this time. But I really appreciate y'all letting me come and speak today, and I'm hoping y'all have taken a lot from this presentation.
Hey, Tanya, I got a quick question.
Thank you, Tanya.
Hey,
we
Tanya,
have a few.
Yes, ma'am.
I got a quick question. So I noticed that you went over the ADKAR, which I wasn't familiar with. I'm more familiar with the DMAIC Six Sigma. Which one do you think is more common, at least out in the quality world?
So from a quality perspective, I would say that the DMAIC methodology is something, if people know Lean and Six Sigma, they're going to know DMAIC, right? And there's actually, it's not just define, measure, analyze, and improve and control. So if you're trying to improve upon a new process, it may be design, measure, analyze, improve, and control. But the ADKAR piece is part of a change management methodology. Like I said, that there may not be a whole lot of people familiar with that, what that is, but that's really just, it's something that's going to help strengthen, as you complete your projects and things, it's really going to help to strengthen your case because you're going to get buy-in from the people that are actually doing the work. And you'll actually have those, if you hear about people that are change resistors and things, it teaches you how to walk and talk and listen to them and learn the reasons why they are change resistors and what you can do to help them to become proactive change.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I think Daniel Fuentes had a question about analysis tools that you use during the DMAIC process.
Okay.
Daniel, are you still here?
They may be muted.
There he is.
Waiting for the answer.
Oh, got some feedback.
Daniel, I can't hear you. It looks like you're muted.
Yes, my question is, what tools do you use in the DMAIC process to analyze?
So one of the things that I'm really passionate about using, and I use it first and foremost, is that fishbone diagram. So I can go back up to it. What it is essentially is collecting all of what we would call the causes. So, the cause and effect, we call it the cause and effect diagram. And so, we try to collect all of the causes that could essentially lead to a potential failure, right? So you're looking at all of that's what this is essentially. If you look at the head of it, it's supposed to look similar to a fish. So the square at the first is supposed to be the fish head, so to speak. And then the bones actually branch out, and that's where you start to map all of your issues. And so as part of Lean Six Sigma, you usually start out with your traditional 6 M's, but as you start to look at your processes, you may want to retitle some of those. So the basic ones are, method, measurements, machine, materials. You see how I have a lot of that defined here, but you may get into others where you want to look more at, okay, what's the lab, what's the issues from a lab perspective? So you may want to retitle the bones. If you start to see a trend and you start to see a collection of issues, that may be something that you need to title as one specific big problem and start to collect all of those issues under that. And then the other thing that is also really useful is the 5 why. And so the 5 why is actually where it's, you're asking the why consecutively, right? And sometimes, you may not even get to 5 whys. There may be 4 whys because you want to stop at a place where it doesn't make sense anymore. And so even when you're kids, that's one of the things that kids actually do a lot is they ask why. So that commercial that's on TV, well, why'd you spill grape juice on the carpet, right? Or, why were you late for work? Well, it was because I had a flat tire. Why did you have a flat tire? Well, I had a nail in my tire. Why did you have a nail in your tire? Well, I ran over a pothole and there was a nail in it. Well, why was there a pothole with a nail in it? And you see where I'm saying there's a point to where it gets to where it may not make sense, but, and it may be because, you're running late for work or, you're driving too fast or something like that. You just have to start using these tools to really start gathering information. And that's what's good about these tools, is that's what it does. You have to be an effective listener and really listen for the issues as part of a process. And then you can document those and make those really visual to where you can put in sustainable solutions to address those.
But for the root cause analysis, but what tools do you use to analyze the data? Do you use Pareto charts?
Yes,
Use
Pareto charts, histograms. I think it really just depends on how complex you want to get. I mean, even as a master black belt, we sometimes get into a heavy data analysis. Like I said, the more complex the project, the more statistical analysis that you use. And so the more heavier the Six Sigma is, the use of Six Sigma, as you get into a master black belt level, the more data analysis and statistical tools you'll use. And so as a yellow belt project, you may use more lean tools, but as you get more into being a master black belt, it may be about more using statistical tools as well as your lean tools.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
So Tanya, as you were doing the presentation or doing the project, what do you feel was one of your biggest challenges or one of the team's biggest challenges as they got started?
I think one of the things that was, like I said, that the challenge was, mapping out that current state, because one of the things that we found, we couldn't really it was hard to come to a consensus about what the current state was, just simply because nobody did it the same way. And so it was really, that's the reason why we ultimately mapped out 3 separate processes, just simply because there wasn't one standard way. Like I said, Lean Six Sigma is all about getting consensus, but what we were finding is that we just couldn't come to a consensus about what current state was. And so we really had to map it out the way it was and just get an agreement from, okay, some of these steps are similar, but some are different. And then what can we do to potentially standardize upon those processes?
That's good. And this is a fabulous example of how to apply Lean and Six Sigma in the healthcare, but it really can apply in any industry. It's a fabulous tool. So if people had an interest in how to apply Lean or Six Sigma tools in their particular environment, what would be your recommendation?
I mean, you can apply Lean. So we have a process, a PI process that we call 5S. It's even something you know, and I learned outside of, you know, there's different meanings for different things, but the way I memorized it is sort, straighten, sanitize, standardize, and sustain. And so to me, that's an organizational PI tool, a set of tools that you can use to really, I mean, you could use that in your personal life. Just say, for instance, you wanted to go out and, you know, rearrange your garage. Like you wanted, you know, you want to have a garage sale, you want to get rid of different things. Using that 5S methodology in the flow of how 5S works, like first you sort through things, and then you straighten things up, and you determine, you know, sort through and determine what you want to get rid of versus what you want to keep. Then you sanitize, and then you standardize where you want these different things to go. So sort, straighten, sanitize, standardize, and sustain. And I guess there's other different meanings for that, but it all pretty much gives you the gist of the same thing. And then the last, there's also what we call 6S, which is, you know, what I teach as part of my training as well, is the 6S. It really came in as 5S started getting into healthcare, was the 6S is safety. And so as part of making improvements, you want to improve upon the safety aspect as well. So it went from being a 5S improvement methodology to a 6S improvement methodology, because we really want to ensure that when we build a process and improve upon a process, we want to ensure that the processes that we're putting in place are of the best quality, and they're also the safest processes that we can put into place.
Very good. So I do have a question in the chat for you. What % of time do you feel that you spent on the project defining the process versus improving the process? So proactive versus reactive.
I think it really just depends on how detailed you want to go. A lot of times when we start projects, we have no baseline. Like a lot of people will say, just, you know, when they talk to others, well, we know we have a problem, we just don't know how complex the problem is. We don't have a baseline metric. And so as part of that define phase, it's really about building something, you know, so basically doing time motion studies, or really going to the Gemba. So that's something else as part of PI in the define phase, and all through out Lean Six Sigma. You really want to go to the Gemba, to where the work is being done, and determine from, and look at it with your own eyes and see where those issues are as part of those processes. And so it's not just about collecting the voice of customer, which essentially is what you do in the define phase. It's about looking for your own eyes to see where those issues are. So it's a validation aspect of it. But, you know, back to the point I was trying to say, so, you know, it really just depends on the information that you have when you first start those projects out. If you've already been tracking the data because you're starting to see trends of issues, or you may have survey data or something like that to really tell you where the problems are. But if you don't, and you have to start tracking it, there is going to be a lot more time spent in the define phase, because you really have to build the problems. You really have to build something to track those issues to see how complex the problems are in the current state.
Awesome. Thanks. So if you do have more questions, please keep them coming. We do have a poll,